The C# language provides a feature called access modifiers, which allow you to control how the member variables and methods of your classes are seen by the outside world. In other words, code that uses your objects. And if you're coming from another language like Java or C++, you've probably seen something similar. JavaScript does not have this kind of idea in it. So if you're coming from JavaScript, you might want to pay attention to this. So by default, when you define data and methods in your class, those data fields and methods can only be used inside of that class itself. You have to choose to expose them to other code that's going to consume your classes. And this is what access modifiers let you do. They let you specify how programs, including your own, that use your classes can access their data and their methods. So let's take a look at how this works. Suppose we had a class, and I have a class here called myClassName, and we've got some fields in it. So we've got an integer, and we've got a string, and we have some method called myFunction. By default, all of these are what's called private. Only the class that defines these can use it. We need to change that in order for code that wants to consume our class to be able to access the members of this class. The way that we do that is by using what's called access modifiers. And if you watch the preceding movie, you'll have probably noticed me using the word public. Well, there are a couple of different ways to expose members of the class to code that wants to use them. So let's take a look. The first one is called the private modifier. When you use the private access modifier, it means that the member of the class who's marked as private can only be accessed within the class itself. Now, this is the default setting, so if you don't specify private, the C# compiler defaults to making a member variable or member method as private. The next one is public. A public class member can be accessed by any other object that uses the class. And this is why I was using the public keyword in the previous example so that our code could consume that particular member of the class. The next one is called protected. A protected class member can only be accessed within this class or any subclass. In other words, a class that inherits from this class. So we've got private, we've got public, and we've got protected. So there's one more, and it's called internal. And this is a class member that can be accessed by any class in what's called the same assembly. An assembly is a package of code like a library or another program. But this is an advanced feature of C#, and I'm not going to cover it here in this course. Just know that you might see the word internal every now and then. It's sort of like protected, but it means that only a group of related code can use it. But for the purposes of this course, we're going to use private, public, and protected. So in order to see how these work, let's jump over to the code and define a class that uses these, and you can see what happens when we try to use code that uses each one of these access modifiers. So over here in the code, I've got my example snippets open for the access modifiers example, and over here I've got my program file. So here's what we're going to do. First, we're going to define a new class, and in this case, we're going to put the class in a separate file. So what I'm going to do over here is I'm going to right-click on the project name called access modifiers, and I'm going to go down to the add submenu, and you can see that I can add items to my project. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add a class. And then the add class dialog comes up, and you can see that there's a whole bunch of things that we can add, all kinds of classes. What I'm going to do is just make sure that the default one in here in the list called class is selected, and then I'm going to give my class a name, and in this case I'm going to call it my wine class. I'm going to click add, and you can see that the file for wine.c# or .cs got added, and you can see that the C# Express application has done a whole bunch of work for us. First of all, it's automatically put the wine class into the same namespace as our example. It's included the using statements for the .NET framework that we're going to be using. And right here you can see it's provided a definition for class wine. So let's go back to the snippets. What we're going to do now is fill out that wine class with some default code. So I'm going to copy these lines here, go back to my wine class, and I'm going to paste them in. So now in our wine class, we have a couple of different members. We have the wine name, we have the wine price, and we have the wine description. And you can see that all of those are public. So any code that wants to use this wine class will have access to those member variables. We have a decimal variable here called discount, and that's marked as private. So nobody outside this class can see what that is. And then we have a public constructor, which takes a wine name and a price. And inside the constructor, you can see that we've got the name and price public variables that are being set to the arguments that are being passed into the constructor. And then we give the discount variable an initial value as well. And we can do that here because this is our class, and we can refer to our own private members within our own class. So let me save this, and let's go back to the snippets. Now, let's go ahead and copy over some code. I'm going to copy these 2 lines first, and we're going to go to the main function, and I'm going to paste them in. So here you can see that I've got 2 instances of the wine class being created, and I'm passing in some default values for names and prices. So let's write some code now that exercises some of the fields of the class. So for example, if I wanted to refer to the name of one of the wines, I can simply write string and give it a variable name equals, and I can say W1. And now watch what happens when I press dot. Now, when I press the dot, C# Express is looking at the class description and saying, okay, what can the code in this particular area see inside that class? And we've got a couple of default things because we always derive from the base system object. But here's the name and the price fields that I've defined. Here's the description field because those were all public. And you can see that this is an alphabetized list. What's missing? Well, the discount field is missing. Why? Because it's private. And because it's private, my code can't see it. So I can go ahead and refer to the wine.name all I want to. But if I try to refer to the discount field, let me make a decimal, and we'll call it DSC. If I say W2.discount, now watch what happens. I'm going to save this. See that little red squiggle showed up, and if we mouse over that little red squiggle, we say error. It says the access modifiers.wine.discount is inaccessible due to its protection level. Go back over to the wine code. You can see that this is private. So private members can't be referred to outside of the class that defines them. Now, we could have also made it protected, and protected would also result in an error. So let's just change that. Let's just make this private. We'll make this protected, and we'll save, and we'll go back over to the program, save and compile. And you can see that we still have that same error there, right? Even though we made it protected, because in this case, we don't have a class that descends from wine. So it's not inheriting the discount field, and because it's protected, only subclasses can see it. So this is how you use the various access modifiers of C# to selectively expose member variables and member functions to code that's going to consume your objects. And the reason you want to do this is because in good programming practices, you don't want to just make everything public. You want to choose how you expose your code to consumers of your code. That way you can change the way things are implemented inside your class without breaking people that are consuming the class in other programs. So using access modifiers, you can selectively expose parts of your program to other consumers.